first question would be that you started off as an engineer, you worked as an engineer, and then you changed. And why did you change? What well-paid job, secure future?
I didn't actually work as an engineer. I mean, in any substantial sense. I just worked like for 3 months or 6 months between doing things. So, well, one of the humorous stories is that I became an engineer rather than a physicist because I went to a guidance counselor, and because I liked working with people, so the guidance counselor guided me to become an engineer rather than a physicist, because engineers work more with people. And that's very funny. Somebody once in New Zealand introduced me as saying he used to work with engineers, but now he likes to work with people, implying engineers aren't people. So really, I even went into engineering because I had an interest in working with people. But I was politically involved in South Africa in fighting against the South African government, the apartheid government. So I was very involved in social, or in politics, student politics. And I liked working with people. The majority of my friends became psychiatrists, psychotherapists. So there was an intrinsic interest right from the start. I think growing up in a kind of totalitarian country like South Africa was, being a psychologist didn't have a lot of possibilities. I didn't even consider going into psychology. And then I came to Canada, and it was the early 60s and the early 70s. And then psychology was a very high profile. People were really interested in it, and that sort of opened it as a possibility for me. And then I lost the social relevance of the political situation in South Africa, and I was searching for greater social relevance, and in the end I decided to change and go into psychology. So it was a sort of mixture of...
It's a whole new study.
Pardon?
It's a whole new study again, you know.
Yes.
5 years.
Yes. Oh no, but I didn't have to start again.
Oh.
So I thought I was going to have to start again. Coming from my British background, it was unthinkable any other alternative. And it's also a very interesting story, because I called up the university and I asked them, you know, what would I have to do? And they said, well, you'd have to do makeup of 2 years about. And so one day, by chance, I was doing my master's degree in engineering at this point. I went to Canada and I did my master's degree there. A friend of mine said, I'm going to Toronto. They've got a big new computer at York University. Who wants to come with me? So I said I wanted to go because I'd heard, I was at this time already contemplating dropping out of engineering and going to India for a year. This was the time of the Beatles, and they had gone to India. So I was definitely not wanting to continue to do my PhD in engineering. So I had heard, my wife was a psychology undergraduate, so I had heard that there was this woman at York University, Laura Rice, who believed that curiosity was very important in psychotherapy. And that idea appealed to me a lot. So I went with this person, this friend of mine who went to use the computer at York, and I went and I knocked on her door. And this was something like the 10th of August. And she was there. And 10 days later, I was accepted into the doctoral program.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that meeting?
Well, I remember very little, but she tells the story that I appeared there in one of these, so it was a South African cloth, a sort of a Hawaii type shirt made out of the South African cloth, long hair and a beard, I guess I had there. And she said she was trying to figure out whether I was one of these real flaky kind of people who wanted to escape engineering and come into psychology, but she decided that I wasn't. I had very good grades in math and physics and so on, and it was respected as a hard science. And so I don't remember that meeting very well, but she accepted me, and then I had to do 1 year of makeup, but I was accepted straight into a PhD program, so I really didn't have to redo everything. And, that was an incredible experience. It wouldn't happen today.
Mm-hmm. That takes me right into the next question. We always build on the work of others, and you learned and worked with Laura Rice from the Rogerian tradition and with Friedman from the Gestalt tradition. And what did you learn from them? Not everything, but what is
the main things.
The central...
Yeah. Well, I think firstly from Laura, she really was a Rogerian through and through as my supervisor, and that helped me develop confidence in myself. She really had such faith and belief. I experienced her as having such faith and belief in me that I really felt free to say what I really thought and felt. At the same time, she was articulating the Rogerian theory, and that made so much sense to me of what I had been sort of developing with my friends in South Africa, where we really sort of would listen to each other and believed in exploration and curiosity. And so it was both the relationship, supervisory relationship she provided, and the theory that she espoused that really helped me develop. And then she was first and foremost a process researcher. And that really opened up something that I knew nothing about, but fitted my sense of what research should be. Because I thought psychology research was rubbish, coming as an engineer. And I thought I wanted to be a practitioner or do something meaningful. But I thought doing experiments on human beings was just missing the complexity. But then she opened up this possibility of really studying the process of what really happens and ways to do it. And then that's why she took me on, because I had these mathematical skills, and she was hoping that I would be able to analyze moment by moment interactions. And we started off trying to do that with Markov chain analysis and things like that I was already familiar with. But that really failed, but out of that grew this approach of task analysis that we developed. So those are the things I learned from her. From Harvey Friedman, I think I learned how to do two-chair work. Mm-hmm. I observed him, and he was exquisitely sensitive. I had no idea what he was doing, and I don't think he had much idea what he was doing in an articulated manner. Mm-hmm. Right? Because in the end, I did my doctoral dissertation on studying two-chair work, and I interviewed him and I interviewed Polster, and they could only speak in very global terms. But he was a master at it, and I think I absorbed that implicitly. So from him, I learned something about also how to work with people.
Mm-hmm. And when did you feel the need to create something new? It's do you remember that moment that this is not enough, I have to make my thing?
Well, I'm not sure it was ever I have to make my thing. Mm-hmm. I was interested in studying the process of change, and I I was very against, and Laura Rice was very against creating another therapy. And I was not in favor of that, but I think it was the advent of cognitive therapy, and when it became so dominant, I felt it's really important to articulate an alternate view to that. And then I think it was actually the couples therapy, which we named as the first therapy, emotionally focused couples therapy. And it wasn't an individual therapy, because I thought I was Rogerian and Gestalt and so on. But then, having developed the couples therapy and named it, and seeing what doing one outcome study and having a name did for getting attention, it seemed to me that it was important. And then by 1993, I returned to York University in 1986. Laura was retiring and I was sort of taking over. And then together we tried to get a research grant, and that's when it became necessary to name a therapy and develop a manual. So it was really a function of external forces that induced us to have to do it, and then we named it Process Experiential, because both Laura and Robert had no connection with the couples therapy, and they didn't want to name it emotion-focused therapy. It was in the experiential tradition, so we first named it Process Experiential Therapy.
So there isn't really a moment, no. It needed a name.
No. I don't think so.
Okay. What did you learn in those years about what you should do better or different in order to be a better therapist?
I think two things: that I should focus more on emotion, and that I needed to combine following with leading, or following and guiding. And that was helped a lot by doing the couples therapy, because in the couples therapy I became easier with giving direction or needing to take more control. So client-centered therapy acted as a very strong superego at first, like you mustn't direct people, it's bad to control, it's bad to influence. And it was eventually coming to a resolution of that, and that was that there's a dialectic, that one needs to really follow, that's really important, but that's just a one-note tune, and one needs to also guide. I think those were the things that I learned. But then from my research, I started learning to really pay attention to the moment-by-moment process. So I was learning things all the time about little mini moments.
Are there things that, could you say two things that a therapist really shouldn't do?
Shouldn't do?
Yeah, like those.
Don't believe that you know better than your client what's going on in your client. Don't force them, impose on them. And don't invalidate people's experience. I think those are different.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. What do you think motivates you most in this work?
I have a real conflict throughout my life. Curiosity motivates me, and then ambition.
Uh-huh.
And there's a dialectic between them, because I start off always with curiosity, but then my ambition is high and it takes over, and then I follow my ambition, and because ambition has to do with the real world and has to obey the dictates of what's demanded, like publishing.
Ambition, how? Like being known or being...
Making an impact. But I think some of it is, Are you joking? Oh,
Yes,
no.
it's not very obvious
Oh,
to me.
right. I mean, I believe that I have the right view, and I think I feel very misunderstood that people don't understand. And I mean, that speaks to such a faith in my own view.
Can you say something more about what do people not see, or
They don't see how fundamental emotion is. They don't see how fundamental empathy is. And they don't see that they should do task analyses. They don't see that the kind of research that they promote, the randomized clinical trials and outcomes, are complete nonsense. And that they don't do what they claim to do, that they overlook the complexity and they reduce it to rubbish, and yet that's the way of the world. So that's where ambition, so I end up doing that kind of research in order to get the recognition that what we're doing is valuable.
But how is that a conflict? I mean,
because then it takes me away from doing more meaningful things. So in my career, sort of RCIs and task analysis are, if you spend your time doing randomized controlled trials, not RCIs, RCTs, right? I don't do task analyses and really study how people change. If I really just did intensive analyses and studied how people change, we would never have done a randomized clinical trial, and there wouldn't have been recognition of what we do.
it's funny that it takes me to a bit of things that I wanted to ask later, but I'll go to them now. It's, there's, for instance, if you look at two people that come to mind, like Linehan and Shapiro from EMDR, they have all these training institutes that flourish all over with thousands of therapists. And when you try to found your school and your thing, so I guess what I want to ask is what do you hope for the future for EFT?
Well, I mean, in making that contrast, I think, there's the implicit statement of how come we didn't develop that kind of marketing of what we do, the same as DBT or EMDR.
I didn't think about marketing. Okay, so you think it
but
has
I
a lot to
see
do with marketing.
I see it as having a lot of marketing and promoting. I mean, this is a question that I'm often, that's often raised, like how come those other things have gotten so much recognition and EFT hasn't, although Sue Johnson has really promoted the couples therapy, so that has a similar kind of recognition.
Yes.
Right? The way I understand it is, I grew up in a British system in which sort of intellectual values were very different. It was sort of like if you spoke something that was truthful, people would find it. You didn't
recognize that it was true.
Yeah, they'd recognize it was true. You don't have to go out and market it and sell it and promote it, because people should find it if it's true. So I just never had a mentality that you needed to promote it. So that's one thing. Now, all my younger colleagues are really very eager to be engaged in promotion, certification, that kind of.
I had a mentality. Does it mean that it has changed?
Well, I see that you need to market things in order to get them out, and that is what works in this world. Am I happy with it? No. But, I do see that it's sort of a necessity in the current context, but I don't like it as a value.
Mm-hmm. It's a fact of life.
just having is there's something similar about non-directivity, right? It's not sort of pushing it at you, and it's assuming that you will find it, sort of like build it and they will come. If you build it, they will come. So yeah, just my assumption was in academia you do your work and then people either find it or not. But I mean, I know it's not that simple, and power is endemic to life. And but the question you really asked is, what about the future? Right?
What would you like to hope? What do you hope that happens with?
Well, what I really believe in is that eventually we'll form an integrative approach to psychotherapy, and there will be no schools, and that we'll really understand how to work with people and how best to facilitate people. Will it happen? I don't think it'll happen easily or quickly. I mean, what I really believe in is that there are markers, people in different states, and that there are good ways to intervene, and some of them will involve cognition, some behavior, some emotion, some interaction, and that eventually we will study and understand change processes. So that's my hope. Again, given the way the world is, we have to develop a strong voice of experiential and emotion-focused therapies in order to sort of have a place on the table. So I think that's what has to be done now. And that's the sort of pragmatic, and I don't know if it's ambition as such, but I mean, it means you have to do things that aren't following curiosity alone.
I think you once said, you said something about pearls, that you didn't like pearls. It was like so stardom, its way of attitude. In the meantime, you're becoming a celebrity yourself.
Right.
How are you dealing with that? All that.
I don't remember saying that I didn't like pearls because of the stardom part, but you mean like a guru, I guess. But
yeah, something like that.
I saw pearls as harsh but I think maybe I said I didn't like the style of therapy that got promoted because it was more like a performance.
Yes.
He was going around.
He knew it all, and he was right.
Okay, yeah. So some of it was interpretive, but also the style of doing hot seat work and doing these films was sort of like it became more of a performance than what real therapy is like, right? So, I mean, there's a danger of that, and how am I dealing with being sort of a figurehead? I hope to maintain my humility.
I can see now that it is really a dilemma. It's like, and it's a very strange dilemma as well, because if you, on the one hand, you just said you want to advocate that you don't want to say to people, I know as a therapist, I know it better than you do.
Yeah.
On the other hand, you have this, within therapy and things, why don't they see I'm right?
Yeah.
It's really conflict.
Right.
Yeah.
And in a sense, that's a dialectical tension, right? So I think I developed a view that everything is the duality and opposing things, and then you have to integrate them.
What do you think that are the limits of EFT? What do you think can be changed or can be changed by EFT? Like, where do you feel like
Well, I think, the way that I present it is that EFT is good for people whose functional impairment isn't too high. So, I mean, if people are really highly dysregulated and can't get up out of bed in the morning and are cutting themselves and self-harming, EFT isn't the first line of intervention. So limit on the degree of dysfunction. And I mean, otherwise, EFT is highly variable. It can vary from purely empathic, supportive relationship to doing different degrees of intervention and or regulation. So I think it has a fairly broad range of application across personality disorders and axis 1 disorders and so on, but not with psychotics, not with psychopaths.
What about personality disorders? There's always this issue, there's complex personalities, and how far can EFT get with that?
I think as far as any other treatment can get with that, but that's why I was saying with axis 2 disorders, which are personality disorders, right? So because then you use the empathic relationship and that, so both with borderline and narcissistic personalities, I mean, we would use an empathic approach and a real relationship approach. So I think, we haven't tested it, right? But we wouldn't be using highly activating interventions early on with more complex personalities. So, I think it was equally applicable, but you wouldn't necessarily jump into chair work, early on in those relationships, but you might after a couple of years.
So it's like more like you need much more preparation before you can go there.
Yeah. Much more relational security and working through, because some clients are just very sensitive to the relationship. They need to hold your face in view all the time and are very sensitive to what's going on between you, so then you would work with that in an empathic kind of style.
You wrote books with Saffron in...
Right, 86.
87 and 91, yeah. And then, so you kept on the emotion track, that was really for you the center and the heart of therapy. And Saffron went to the relationship part, really. And relationship, you seem to deal with relationship issues as far as it may help or stand in the way of emotional work. But do you feel that so you don't really look or focus on a relationship in its own right? It's more like I have to deal with it in order to get somewhere else.
Right. Really, we see the relationship in and of itself as curative, but that means the empathic relationship. If I provide you a good relationship, that's in and of itself curative. So we see it also as providing the context for other interventions, but we do see the relationship as highly
like
curative.
what you said, this corrective emotional experience, I think you call it that.
Yes. That would be, that's more focused on particular moments. But overall, I think having a good relationship that's empathic is the most curative. Then to that we add the kind of interventive part, but the relationship facilitates the interventions as well, right? But what we don't do is do the therapy through the medium of relational difficulties. So we're not looking at conflict or interpersonal patterns or reactivity in the relationship as the medium of change. We're trying to provide an empathic, secure relationship and see that eventually will help change without focusing on things that happen as representative of your problems.
Do you think that might be useful, or do you think it really misses the point?
The focus on what's going on in difficulties. I think it's useful to the degree that there are ruptures in the relationship, and to the degree that it's getting in the way of other things. So it occurs maybe in, I'm just guesstimating, 20% of relationships
things, because what I feel is that the relationship or characteristic of the person really is so determining if the emotional work flows smoothly, or if there's really a lot of work to be done before. And this really makes it look so different, if
I'm not quite sure what you, but yeah, so the relationship and the alliance are primary, and until that is working, you can't really work on emotion. Is that?
Yeah. Well, I think what I want to say is that I kind of miss that fact because it's so crucial. For instance, if we look at the APA tapes, you have the 2-session tape and the 6-session tape. It looks so different. I mean, the 2-session tape, you can do so much work because it's so accessible and and then in the 6-session tape, you can get rid of it's really a lot of work and I think what I'm saying is that what I miss a little bit in your work is more on what you have to do to get people there to be able to do this work.
Right.
I mean, maybe it's.
But you see, what we say, and this is an issue that has been raised. We say that other people, particularly for me, Rogers, has said what you need to do in the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't focus on that because that's not our contribution.
Okay.
Right? But that's primary.
Mm-hmm.
And we believe that the empathic relationship is primary. Right? Now there may need to be more articulation in that domain because part of the Rogerian conditions are being genuine, but now current interpersonal psychoanalysis, actually arrives at a pretty similar position, but being genuine is a very complicated thing. And so recently we've, written this book on therapeutic presence, which is just trying to deepen the understanding of what it is to be in this kind of relationship. But the relationship is extremely complicated and you need a whole set of interpersonal skills, and that hasn't been what we focused on.
Mm-hmm. That makes it very clear to me. It's not our contribution, of course it's important. Yeah. I would like to go back now more to the motivational part. So one of the things I would like to ask is what is beauty for you in your work? Where do you see beauty?
It's funny because it's fairly easy to answer that. I see beauty in people's pain.
That's surprising.
I think when people go to their most painful, wounded places, they are actually the most beautiful, because they are letting me be with them in a place that they hardly ever go to or ever let anybody see. And I think there's an incredible sense.
Vulnerability.
The vulnerability. So I think a small child is the most beautiful being in their innocence and openness, and when people usually are only that open and vulnerable when they're being vulnerable.
It's feel really
it's like a flower just opening. And I mean, I guess people could open into awe or wonder or other experiences, but somehow it's when they let you close to their pain.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that's interesting for me to say in words as well. And I think it evokes incredible compassion from me, and, that's the human experience. And that doesn't, and it's an intense experience of intimacy, and that is beautiful.
It is. Do you cry a lot with clients?
No.
No, you don't. That's what I thought. I do a lot. Like, how does that work?
Yeah.
Because, no, it was just curiosity.
Yeah.
And I guess something else I want to ask is like, when you do feel intensely what your clients feel, it reflects.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure I feel what they feel, that's good.
No, okay.
Right. But I do have a feeling in response.
Yes.
I feel close or compassionate.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I feel close or compassionate, or they're all sort of more tender, loving feelings. Not, if you feel shame, I don't feel shame. I feel concern and compassion and tenderness.
Yeah, sure, you don't feel shame. You might understand somebody else's pain.
Right.
Yeah. You've been working with intense emotion for years. Is there no habituation or...
Yeah, that's interesting. I think about that at times because it's sort of like, oh yeah, there's a... So I think at times I may not fully appreciate how difficult, exhausting, frightening it is and how courageous people have to be there.
Yeah, because sometimes it's such a big step for people to go there, and for you it's something almost ordinary every day.
I think that's it. It may be not appreciating the courageousness that it takes for this person. Whereas, when I was younger, I would be on the edge of my seat, so to speak. But now it's not like that. But that also, probably has its pros and cons, right? It also allows me to facilitate it because it's not as frightening to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I remember there was this story that you told me in Switzerland in the car. I said, I really love teaching. He said, I love teaching so much. That was like 2 days in the middle of the Alps, and then I looked up, hey, I'm in the Alps. That was such a beautiful story. And I think it says a lot about you. And you just talked about your compassion and maybe your passion for this work and for the emotion, for when people really open up. But I believe there's also another passion you talked about there, like teaching or science, or can you say something more about that?
What came to mind immediately when you said that, and it was when I was 15 years old, I had a classroom of my friends in my house with a blackboard. I was teaching them mathematics for their exam, right? And these were the people who weren't so good at it, right? And so I always loved teaching. And then I loved mathematics. And it was fascinating to sort of understand it and then to be able to convey it to others.
But you're not teaching mathematics now. So
no.
What is the real...
What's the motivation?
Yeah, what's the real thing about teaching?
Well, recently somebody said to me, you said, one of the 6 emotions is interest. And she said interest isn't an emotion. And many people have that. I remember when I read that interest is one of the basic emotions, it really reverberated with me. So I think, I'm just interested, and I have a lot of curiosity, and then teaching comes out of that.
It's like being... Sorry if you interrupted.
No, go ahead.
Is it like really wanting to share your understanding, right?
Yeah, I think it's one...
Look what I found.
Yeah. And I think that ties into client-centered therapy because I think I've always had a high need to be understood. to understand what I'm thinking, because it's very validating of me. So I think there's a high need to be understood. And then when I'm teaching, and when I'm able to make it clear enough, I feel people understand. And at some deep personal level, I think that feels like being understood.
Mm-hmm.
And I just feel great excitement about conveying what I know and people appreciating it. There's a strong interpersonal part, and there's a strong intellectual, fascination, a passion.
Pleasure.
Yeah, there's pleasure, definitely pleasure. So Pearl said there were, in his sort of flowery language, he said there were 3 orgasms. Right, there was an orgasm into anger, into grief, and into excitement. And I made this strong critique, when I was a student. I said, but he misses that there's an orgasm into intellectual insight, or into seeing something new. So that's how I've always experienced it. And then teaching it is an opportunity to communicate it.
Maybe to communicate this beauty that you saw, but that you understood.
Yeah.
Mathematicians that
Exactly.
beauty of mathematics, when it all fits together.
Yeah, exactly. This is how it works. So the counterpoint to beauty is pain is beauty is in the understanding of something.
Mm-hmm. Something else which I remember now is like when I saw you teaching first time, or giving a workshop the first time, I saw this person who stood up and he looked very grounded, and he was standing, and then he slowly started to talk, and then it kind of never stopped, and you wouldn't really know where it would come from. It was like a very...
Sorry, you wouldn't know where you wouldn't know where...
Well, it seemed like to come all so naturally. It's
I
like...
see, yes.
I was curious if... What kind of state is that, when you start talking and think, oh, I remember this example, and then when I was there, and then you suddenly move back to the theory, and it all seems like coming, I don't know if it works that way, but...
So in some way, I would theorize that I'm in a state of flow.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, that crossed my mind as well.
Yeah. Because some of this insanity of traveling around the world, and like last year it wasn't all work, but I was traveling for 7 months in 1 year. It's like because I get into a state of flow when I'm teaching, so it's a very pleasurable experience, so doing therapy, truly investigating something, and teaching all put me into a state of flow.
Mm-hmm. You don't really think about what you're going to say before. Do you prepare? I was kind of surprised, like, who has the nerve comes here and says, I don't really know what's on these videos, but just let's have a look, It seems all very...
Well, of course I've written books and I've prepared a set of slides, so things are in me at different levels, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I do think at some point, but writing and teaching are also ways of clarifying what one is thinking. See, this is what I said with Laura Rice. Laura Rice somehow listened and validated everything I said, so to speak, and we would sit and I would say, well, it's like, why is this way, and maybe it's this way, and she would interact and we would co-explore, but I think that gave me such a sense of safety in doing that and providing the relationship, and I wasn't, she's my supervisor, but I wasn't worrying that she was judging me. And so when you get rid of conditions of worth, then you just open. So it has something to do with the confidence to have a voice, to say what I think. I do worry about being criticized or being attacked, but I guess only minimally. And then I feel very hurt.
When's the last time you were criticized?
Well, my wife criticizes me and my children criticize me quite.
Of course.
Or
in terms we're talking
in the
yes,
professional domain.
Professionally. Something that really hurt, for instance, people.
I can't remember.
A long time ago.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so, yeah.
Is there anything else that you're very passionate about in your life?
Yeah, some things. And food.
And food.
So the libidinal impulses are definitely things that I'm passionate about. But I'm so involved in my work, but I would like, at one time I played squash and a little bit of tennis, but my conditions is not that good to be engaged in physical activity, but I bicycle ride, and at times you enter a state of flow, bicycle riding, but there's nothing else really that I'm passionate about. I'm about, hopefully, to become a grandparent, and look forward to that.
The last questions I have are, I guess, more and more technical somehow. When you do chair work, sometimes things happen that wouldn't really happen in real life. So it would, for instance, having a parent forgiving or saying, "I love you," and clients may even comment and say, "Well, I never say it," but still, it seems to change people, and in a deep way. And I mean, it seems to be kind of a self-deception in a sense. And I would like to know if you agree with that, and if you feel that that's bad or problematic or not, or...
Right. I mean, I think that happens, but I don't see it as self-deception, and I think, this is a complicated question, but I think it's the difference between concept and experience. And I think people at that time access and experience, in whatever way they do, of feeling loved by the parent. And that is real. So that real experience changes memory, it changes how we feel. And from a constructivist point of view, it's like, it's not a deception, it's a construction.
Yeah, but sometimes I'm fine with it, but it sometimes gets a bit of a feel like everything goes, everything's possible,
Well, experientially, everything is, I guess. As the Buddhist monks show, you can end up feeling compassion for your enemy, because different kinds of experience can be internally constructed. So I think when you say, my father goes into a chair and says, "I love you," and you say, I know he could never say that in the real world and never would, but I know that inside of him that's what he feels.
Okay.
You're constructing a certain experience and you feel it, and
But
it's not a
some
deception.
truth of it, you said,
each person can access some sense of the other that is representative of that, and therefore feels it is true.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, who knows what's actually true?
Yeah. Yeah, it's, there's these now with EFT and some other therapies which seem to use this changing emotion with emotion, and we suddenly see that it can change memory. It's like, is this the good thing? The other day I heard a story, which I can share with you, someone like who had been a woman who had been cheated.
Who had been
cheated by
yes.
her husband, and I don't know exactly what she did, like some EFT or some EMDR, whatever it was, and the week was okay, didn't hurt anymore, and they continued. And, is that? Aren't you? Isn't it possible? I haven't figured it out completely. But isn't it possible that you take away the adaptive value of the pain too easily? Do I make myself clear?
Oh yeah, I mean, because the problem in cults, for example, is you can sort of persuade people, brainwashing them into believing anything, and then they lose their sense of individuality or autonomy. So, I mean, people can be led astray, right? By persuasion and things like that. So, but firstly, you're not doing it to somebody. I don't have an investment. You see, that's the issue, is if I have an investment, say, in marriage, and feel people must be married, and therefore you have to get over your pain of your husband cheating you in order to stay together, then I'm really influencing you.
Mm-hmm.
But if you are there working on your pain and saying, I want to stay married.
Let's say that this person, trusts you, and you say, well, but I can help you over this pain, and you really do this work, and, the pain is gone. And she feels acceptance, and she goes on again. It's a kind of it's a powerful technique in a way.
Yeah, but she's saying she wants the pain to go, and she wants to, I'm following, I guess, what her goal is. Mm-hmm. Right? She's not saying, I want to get divorced and this is such a violation, I can't tolerate it anymore. Mm-hmm. Then I'm saying, well, let's work on it, maybe you'll get over it, and I think you should stay together because marriage is sacrosanct. I'm not doing that.
Mm-hmm.
So...
Do you see that there is a way in which EFT could be used wrongly?
Yeah, it could be misused. Anything.
Okay, yeah, but how would you see that?
Well, I think that there's...
Ethically, you're not in the advantage of the person,
Yeah, but anything could be misused, right? Given that it's a change process and that there's some influence involved, if you influence people towards your own agenda, you can be doing harm to them. I think one of the things recently, there's been something that's appeared in the literature which is saying, and it may even relate to some of the recent therapies, which is you don't have to go into all the pain, you can just go to the positive, and therefore by taking people into their pain, you're actually misleading them and harming them, because you could just move straight to the positive, right? I think some behavior therapies may veer in that direction, and then you could say that saying a critique of EFT could be that you don't have to go into the pain. But that's why research is necessary to test. If you take people into their pain, does it help or does it just make them worse, or are they suffering unduly? But you see, that's where I think the issues of power and directiveness and influence come in. I mean, I don't see that I'm harming you as long as it's helping you to achieve your goal and some...
I mean, every therapy needs ethics.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, if you came to me and you said, I want to feel okay about murdering somebody, right. I mean, so there are higher level ethics that must apply in any situation, but that's not got to do with EFT as such, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Sure. What is the best therapist you ever met?
I think I was very impressed with Harvey Friedman, my Gestalt trainer. I was very impressed with Mnuchin as a family therapist. I think Laura Rice was a very good empathic therapist. I think those are the three best therapists that I've been exposed to.
I guess I'm through my questions more or less. I forgot some.
Good.
I hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you.
And thank you.
I like the part about beauty.
You did.
In both domains, I mean, and my, helping me to articulate.
And the satisfaction it gives you to share.
Yeah. Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good.